Welcome in, everyone. Today we have a very special show because it is a very special day for a very special month. It is October 1st, October Cybersecurity Awareness Month 2025, and we are starting this one off with a banger because today we have with us Chief Technologist and Cyber Risk Behavioral Scientist of the Cyber Risk Collaborative and author, Dr. Dustin Sachs. Dustin, it's great to have you here.
Thanks. I thought you were going to say it's pumpkin spice month, but I guess it's already been pumpkin spice season, so yeah.
You make a great point, actually. That does make everything a little more special as well.
But no, it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is, I think some of us it is our favorite month of the year. So,
Absolutely. And the reason why I have been so excited to have you here and to talk to you is that you have a book that has just been published September
yep.
30th titled Behavioral Insights into Cybersecurity. And I'm not sure how much you know about Hawks Hunt, but basically Hawks Hunt is all about behavior. It's about for years now, Hawks Hunt has been turning that conversation around security awareness on its head to really focus on the behavior aspect. And that, of course, is completely underpinned by cyber psychology, by neuroscience, and by behavioral science. And so you are one of the preeminent cyber psychologists, one of the preeminent cyber behaviorists. And I would just love to hear you tell us a little bit about your academic and professional journey to this point.
Yeah, so I started out my career in the early 2000s really doing computer forensics, pre-iPhone, back in the days when it was just desktops, laptops, servers. So, I think it was interesting because as I look back now, I realize that my entire career has been underpinned by psychology. It started out as understanding how, you know, bad actors or individuals, operating on a computer, what they did, how they acted, why they did what they did. If it was theft of trade secrets, why do they walk out? How do they walk out with data? What's the most likely ways? And then, moving into the incident response and large incident management, it was, thinking like an attacker. And then ultimately moving into the security management side, I worked in a SOC for about 6 months, right before COVID started. Um, and that was a lot about, understanding the work that a cyber professional takes and some of the toll that occurs in decision making as a result of being in a SOC role. I then moved into GRC, and for me, GRC is all about uh, cyber psychology, about understanding people, because part of it is either understanding why people do what they do and then creating policies or interventions that will help avoid those issues, or it's understanding how to convince and persuade somebody to do something that maybe is against what they would want to do or what they're kind of conditioned to do. And then ultimately, really dug into this issue when I started my doctorate in 2022, because I had been sitting around with your friend and mine, Sean Bowen, and who was CISO at World Fuel at the time. And I was fortunate to be one of his deputies in charge of GRC. And we were sitting around talking about the fact that I would give third party risk assessments. I'd give them to two different people on my team, and I'd get two very different results. And it just, as somebody who comes from a forensic background, it really kind of bugged me a little bit. It like made me wonder why. Well, why the scenario is the same no matter who I give it to. And that's when I really started to look at this idea of cognitive bias. And then, you know, as is kind of the nature of academic research, you start down a path and you start realizing that it's connected to this and it's connected to this and it's connected to this. And, what ended up happening was when I finished the doctorate, I looked and said, I've got all this research on these areas of neuroscience and cybersecurity and behavioral science that I'm not doing anything with. But, I'd already discovered something that everybody kind of acknowledged was going on, but no one had actually documented. And then I realized, I kept there was just a statistic out there that kept nagging at me and ultimately led me ultimately to write the book that came out yesterday, which is, you know, we look at the Verizon data breach report every year, and for the last 15 years, I would say it's been 85 to 95% of breaches involve a human element. And what nagged at me was that number hasn't changed. But what do we say every year? We're going to train our people better. We're going to train our people better. We're going to train our people better. So at some point, you got to go, well, wait a second. What we're doing's not really working. The number's not changing. So it caused me to look at and say, well, we've all, for the longest time, we as the cyber industry, the cybersecurity professionals have said, well, it's the end user, it's the end user. And finally I said, well, wait a second. There are two people or two groups of people in this equation. There's both the end user, but there's also the cyber practitioner. So this book is really focused on us as cyber practitioners and what we bring to the equation and understanding our own psychology, our own decision making. And by virtue of that, then ultimately understanding our end user. You know, the example, the kind of simplified example I use always is if you've got a young child and you say, don't eat a cookie, or the traditional experiment that they always talk about is the marshmallow experiment. Put a marshmallow on a plate in a room with a kid and say, I'm going to leave the room. And if I come back in a few minutes and the marshmallow hasn't been eaten, I'll give you a second marshmallow and you'll get two. And what'll happen is, depending on, you'll see that the kid will start off being very good about not doing it, not doing it, not doing it. The longer that that person is out of the room, the adult is out of the room, eventually the kid just gives in. Well, they're not, it's not that that kid is bad, it's that they're responding to their own human nature. But now, if I take that marshmallow or I take that cookie jar and I put it somewhere where you can't get it, or I cover that, and now it's out of sight, or now it can't be seen, or now it can't be gotten to as easily, you're not going to you're not going to do it. The child's not going to necessarily climb the counter to get up to the top of the refrigerator to get a cookie, because one, it takes more effort. Two, they've done the math in their head, whether they're old enough to or not. They've done the math of whether or not they might get hurt, and human nature has said nope, not going to do it. So to me, it was really important that we examine both sides of it. And in doing that, I came across some really interesting insights that I'm going to share with you and with the audience today, that I think is going to really kind of turn our thinking on its head a little bit, which I know is what Hux Hunt really loves doing, and will get you thinking about things in a different way, and will ultimately lead to some really interesting ROI and approaches as we think about what we're going to be talking about this entire month. I mean, the topics every year are the same. You use a password manager. You make sure everything's under MFA. Don't click. Don't be stupid and click on links that you shouldn't click on. It's the same thing. It's been the same thing for what, 22 years now. Like, but if we change our perspective and we look at it a little differently, I think we'll find that there are really some interesting ways to approach things.
Well, I'm looking forward to the presentation. I think everyone is. So that's a great segue. Let's get right into it.
Awesome. So I will pull that up right now. So I always like to title this at a high level, really about hacking your brain. Because at the end of the day, we often forget that the term hacking is really just making something do something it's not supposed to. And really what we're talking about is outsmarting our bias, mastering risk, and really making our brain do things that, quite honestly, it's not really pre-programmed to do. I love quotes, and I love, really good thinkers. Stephen Covey obviously is a huge one. But I really love this quote because it really underscores why I why I do what I do every day. And it's the quality of our decisions determines the quality of our lives. So when and to me, this underpins everything I do because I like to focus, and I tell people I focus not on did I make the right decision, but I focus on did I make the right decision in the right, did I use the right method for making the decision? Because if you use the right process, if you use a sound decision making framework and a sound decision making process, then the outcome of that decision is going to, by its nature, be the correct outcome, and it's going to enhance the quality of your life. So we'll talk a little bit about, what is the problem? Where did this all start from? We'll talk a little bit about how we actually decide, how we as humans decide. We'll talk about a concept called noise, which is a really interesting concept, actually. It makes a lot of sense. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, okay, so we've said that there's this problem here, all the reasons why it happens, but can we actually do anything about it? And I'll, you know, kind of spoil the upcoming, but yeah, we can absolutely. There are steps we can take to make better decisions, and then we'll talk about some actionable steps. What can we do? So when I first looked at this, I was looking at this in the third party risk assessment framework. So, what I really was looking at was the idea that cognitive bias in human decision making leads to inconsistent and unreliable cybersecurity risk assessments. And I looked at third party risk because that was probably the easiest one from a existing literature, gap in the research, etc. There's been a lot of work done on cyber risk quantification and how do we make our internal risk management better, but there was very little on third party risk. So I started to look at it from this, and then it ultimately morphed into a much larger issue um, uh, of behavioral science. So something that that anyone who is fortunate to have pre-ordered, but if you've not, there'll be a link at the end to order. One of the things that I talked about in the book, particularly in the chapter I'm probably the most proud of, is chapter 5, and it posits this view of technology that is, I think, unique. It's definitely a novel approach. And it's based around a common framework that people in psychology and even people in behavioral science know well, and it's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It was put out by a guy by the name of Abraham Maslow, and he kind of posited this pyramid that existed that explains the different motivations we as humans have. And what I found was there's a really interesting corollary to that from a technology standpoint. And when we approach technology both as end users but also as cybersecurity practitioners, and this is where some of those strategies that you're going to implement really can get looked at and viewed in an interesting way. And it begins with this idea that at a base minimum, whenever we interact with technology, the first thing we as humans think about is, do I have a reliable access? Think about when the internet goes out at your house. Doesn't matter anything else about technology at that point. Doesn't matter about anything else. All you do is go, I can't get to the internet. We talk about reliable access. We talk about people who don't have internet access, and we immediately, instinctively feel like without reliable access, you're disconnected from the world. You're not part of the citizenry. Once you've established a reliable set of access, either by giving the hardware to do or the infrastructure to connect to the technological world, then we talk about the idea of, do I trust? Not only and this trust occurs in a number of ways. One is the system I'm using secure? Can I trust the data that I'm interacting with? Can I trust the person who is on this system? This is the basis of where zero trust really begins. Can I, at this base level, trust the various elements of, and it goes beyond just, can I trust the individual? It's, can I trust the system? Is it secure? Once you do all of that, once you get these foundational things, that's when you can start talking about what are the things that we can do to build resiliency and to mature the technology or innovate. Innovation happens at this level. And what's really interesting as I was doing a lot of the research was I realized many of the CISOs that come into their roles, unless you're at a startup and you're helping to build a company from the beginning, and even when you're building from the beginning, when you're building from the beginning, you're building these first levels before you move into maturity. But for those CISOs who come into a role where there has been a CISO before, the built organization has existed for a while, they're often brought in expecting to immediately mature the organization. And they start operating from that third level of the pyramid and working their way up. And they never really go back and do that first 30, 60, 90-day check to go, do I have these other two levels really well secured? They're forced to come in and start at that maturity level. And that's why they struggle to get people to do things, because they'll come in and say, here's what we're going to do to make this program better. And everybody goes, well, but you don't understand is we can't access this system on a regular basis. And as a result, we can't get our jobs done because we don't trust the data, or we don't trust the people, or we have no identity security, or all of these foundational things. Um, and then once you get that once you're at that level where you can start to mature your organization, only then are you really in a mindset and in a position where you can go, are we acting ethically? Are we complying with our various the expectations coming from outside? And once you've got a better sense of, hey, we are acting ethically, we're doing the right thing, we're making sure we're meeting all of our requirements. At that point, then, those are the organizations that are able to then start thinking about how can we help the industry. We always talk about these as the gold standard companies. The reason why there are only a handful of companies that we consider to be the gold standard that everybody follows for, or looks at for what we'll call best practices. And I hate that term because it buys into this concept of the imitation fallacy. And real quick, it's the story that I always tell about the imitation fallacy, the very famous story, which is the guy who was responsible for creating the layout of an Apple store. And anyone who's gone into an Apple store knows there's a very distinct layout. J.C. Penney's, the retail store, saw this and said, we want you to come do that for our stores. And he did it. And he went over and he built the stores and modeled them the same kind of thinking. And it failed miserably because people don't go to J.C. Penney thinking in the same mindset as they do when they go to an Apple store. Plus, the audience that an Apple store brings in is not often the audience that a J.C. Penney store brings in. And they wondered, they were like, well, we don't understand why it worked over here, it didn't work. And that's the problem with best practices, is that when you take them and you apply them without tailoring them to your organization or your market, you run into problems, which is why, and back to our friend Sean, one of my favorite conversations with him, we would talk with other parts of the organization and our tech team, and they would go, we're going to be 100% compliant with CIS level 1 benchmarks for Windows 11. And we'd go, no, you're not, because there's at least one that we're going to stop you. We're going to say, even though the benchmark says you need to change your password every 90 days, we've said if you've got MFA in place, you don't have to change your password. So you're not going to get out of the mindset that you're going to be 100% compliant. You're going to account for 100% of the standards or of the recommendations, but you may not actually, it may be that we say there's an exception to this one. We're not implementing it. We're documenting that. Yes, you've met 100% of, like, you've accounted for 100%, but you're not 100% compliant. Collective impact is that kind of self-actualization, thinking about the world in a better way, but we have to start with these foundational ideas. So how do we decide? We as humans use a concept that was posited in the 1950s, and it's really fascinating that in, the 10,000 or so years of human history, it's only in the last about 70 or 80 years that we've really gotten an understanding of how we as humans make decisions. We've been making decisions since, and I'm going to invoke it only because it's the earliest kind of socially acceptable example of a decision, all the way back to Adam and Eve. We've been making decisions. The idea that was posited by Herbert Simon back in the 1950s was this idea of rational choice, that we as humans make decisions based on what makes the most sense. And what we do is we create a concept known as satisficing. And yes, that is the actual term. And the idea is that we set a set of criteria and we go, once I've reached that criteria, once I've satisfied my criteria, I've made the best decision that I'm going to make, and I'm done. So the way we see this often in our daily lives is you'll hear people say, well, you'll say, did you make the right decision? And they'll say, well, it was good enough. Did you make the best decision? No, no, but it was good enough. That good enough is that level that you've reached of rational choice. We don't sit and process and go, is this really the best choice? Um, and that's because of a concept, this next concept known as bounded rationality. Our brain can only process so much. And at some point, we can't rationalize beyond those criteria. We can't do a full, you know, is this the best decision for everybody scenario? And this is where concepts like game theory come out. We as humans don't typically stop and think about, am I making a decision that also benefits all 7.9 billion other people? No. I make the decision that works for me, and everybody else be damned. And that's not a bad thing. That's not meant to be a negative thing. The problem with rational choice is not only bounded rationality, but the idea that the way we create those criteria is through using heuristics and cognitive bias. Heuristics, mental shortcuts. The easiest way I explain this is, if you think about the path you take to take your child to school, you probably take the exact same path every day, regardless of if there's traffic, regardless of if there's going to be an impediment. You take that same path. Why? Because that's the shortcut. So you don't have to make a decision. You don't have to sit at the computer and look at Google Maps and go, well, it's red here, so I'm going to go this way. And if I end up running into something here, I'll go this way. We don't do that. We don't do, Elliot, what you and I are hoping the coaches of the teams that we have players on our fantasy team are doing, which is going, okay, you're going to go this way, and if he comes this way, we're not going to see the Madden, whiteboard of, oh, he went this way and then he went this way. We'd love if we could do that, but we make 35,000 decisions a day, automatic and otherwise. And I'm talking about everything from should I take a breath or not to the big life decisions. We make about 35,000 decisions a day. We cannot make every one of those decisions as fully as we need to. It would take a year and a half to make that if we spent a minute on each of those decisions. So we introduce cognitive bias, which is, and I always pause here because the idea of cognitive bias, we hear the word bias and we immediately think negative. Cognitive bias is not a negative thing necessarily. Cognitive bias is simply a preference for or against something. So the example I always like to use here, if right now, Elliot, you turned around and a ferocious lion comes into that room, you're going to run and get the hell out of there as quickly as you can. Why? Because you have a cognitive bias towards not dying. Um, we learn as kids when you touch the hot stove that your hand gets burned. So we have now a cognitive bias towards not touching the stove. Cognitive bias is what we use to make decisions and change the way we make decisions. There's a concept known as systems thinking, it could be a whole presentation. It is a whole presentation in and of itself. We as humans have two systems of thinking. System one, which is our automatic. That's every time you take a breath, unless you're underwater, or unless you're about to jump into a bunch of water and go underwater, most of us don't think about, should I breathe? Should I not? We just do it. We've made that an automatic thing. When you hear somebody saying, though, I'm making a major life decision, they are using their system two thinking, very deliberate, very slow. It's the idea that Daniel Kahneman um, posited and Amos Tversky posited of, thinking fast and slow. The fast thinking system one, slow thinking system two. I always share this because it's a really, really odd coincidence, and I love talking about weird coincidences, and really how small the world is. As you and I have learned, this world's a lot. The way we met was the world is very small. But I always share the fact that Daniel Kahneman unfortunately passed away in 2024. Um, I joke though that he passed away the day after I published my dissertation. So my argument is he read my dissertation, said I've done everything I could possibly do, and said I'm out of here. Thanks, guys. I did what I could. Kahneman and his colleagues in 2021, this is a book that our friend Dutch Schwartz introduced me to that really changed my mindset, which is called Noise. He wrote it with two others, Cass Sustein out of the Booth School out of Chicago and Olivier Siboni out of France, and they posited and identified this idea of noise. And noise is just simply all the other things that play into our decision making. The analysis that they did and where they identified noise was really around judges, and what they were looking at was court judges, and they were given um, criminal scenarios. All of the information about who the criminal was removed. It was simply here is the crime that was committed, and they asked them to render a sentence at 10 in the morning and at 3 in the afternoon. And they found that the sentences at 3 in the afternoon were much harsher than the sentences at 10 a.m. in the morning. And the reason they figured that out was judges at 3 o'clock in the afternoon want to get the hell out of work, and they're just making they're making the decisions. They're tired. They're ready to go. They're cranky. They want to go out. They want to leave. But they identified these three types of noise that are out there. The first is level noise. And level noise is the idea that two people, because of their life experiences, because of their unique characteristics, will make different decisions. You and I, we can agree to disagree idea of things. I think that, the Houston Texans are the best team in the NFL. Our friend Gary Hayslip seems to think the Raiders are, although he's got no evidence to back him up on that. But that's the idea of level noise. You can ask somebody a question and get two very different answers. Pattern noise is this idea that we see patterns that may not necessarily be as accurate as they appear. And this one, I always love using this example. If you asked most people, even cybersecurity professionals, what is the most common cybersecurity attack that takes place? Almost everybody will answer ransomware, except statistically, insider threat is the number one. By 60% of all attacks are a insider threat. If you look at how we talk about cybersecurity attacks, we always talk about them being external attacks. Except how many of those external attacks truly the root cause was an internal person clicking a link they shouldn't have clicked? Very few attackers actually break into your system. Most of them, the door is opened for them. That's an internal threat, whether you want to call it that or not, it is. But we are conditioned because we hear ransomware in the news every day or nation state in the news every day to think that those are the most common. So we create these patterns that may not necessarily exist. The last one is my absolute favorite because I love using this example because we are Every single person listening to this either has done this, has been a victim of occasion noise at some point. Most of us do it and don't even realize we're doing it. Occasion noise is variability due to external factors such as mood, environment, timing of the decision. The example I always use for this: every one of us has gone to the grocery store when we're hungry, and every one of us has gone to the grocery store when we're not hungry. Which one do you make better decisions? In which situation do you make better decisions? The one where you're not hungry. That's why they tell you don't go to the grocery store hungry, because you don't make good decisions when you're hungry. We are, as humans, have identified that the occasion of being hungry causes us to make crummy decisions. I'm going to put it in a cybersecurity term here for a moment, and I apologize for anybody I'm going to trigger with this, but I always ask this question: do you make better decisions about cybersecurity related tasks at 5 o'clock on a Friday or 5 o'clock on a Tuesday? Same time of the day, different day of the week. None of us make good decisions at 5 o'clock on a Friday. One, we're often expecting something to go wrong, so we're already stressed out. Two, we want to get out to go for the weekend. We make crummy decisions. That's occasion noise, and we're all victims of it. So, to just kind of get through a couple of things, I'm going to jump past this slide really, because it's about defining the problem. It's about knowing. It's about delaying your intuition. It's about structuring your decision process using what's known as decision hygiene. So where do we go from here? What are the things we can do? We can leverage data and analytics. We can think objectively, even just enhancing your awareness of cognitive bias. I still am a victim of cognitive bias every day of my career and of my life, but I'll recognize that I introduced a cognitive bias. And at that point, I go, you know what? I just made a decision using really crummy decision making, or not what I wanted it to be. The easiest, best way to avoid this, especially in a business setting, is to establish a clear decision making framework. Have a process. Those of us who are in the academic world, who work under the scientific method, there's a reason we're taught the scientific method as kids, because it's a repeatable process we can do every single time. So you might have to have 15 decision frameworks for each type of, one for each type of decision, but have a framework and follow that every time. Encourage collaboration. Actually having multiple people, diverse perspectives, can help you identify scenarios where you've been blind to your own biases, because that's what happens most often. I always say this, but leverage technology. AI is really great for this purpose. Why? AI doesn't get tired. AI doesn't get moody. AI doesn't care what time of day it is or how much work they've done, or whether it's had enough coffee or whether it's hungry. AI is set. If you've got a clear decision-making framework, AI can operate that decision framework every single time. Obviously, aligning your security decisions with business objectives. That's the most important thing. Am I really making a decision that is in the best interest of the business? So, in summary, again, we have to have a structured, intentional approach. We have to move cybersecurity decision making as much into system two, slow, deliberate thinking as we possibly can. We have to embrace that. The last thing I'll leave with is, somebody pointed this out, and I forget who it was, but somebody pointed out to me the common acronym we use: PPT, People, Process, and Technology. And what they pointed out that I had never stopped to truly think about was, what's the first letter in that one stand for? People. Whether it's true or not, people is first. Somebody did that, whether they did it consciously or subconsciously, put people first, technology last. And there's a reason why they did that. And that is because they want people to be the primary center of things. We have to put humans at the center of this. We have to promote awareness of bias. We have to be uncomfortable. We have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Um, and with that, again, I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here to share this. I love sharing this. I'm going to be giving presentations over the next couple of weeks about this at various conferences. Um, if you want to read more of the original research, you can read that. There's a QR code for that. If you want to get a copy of the book that just came out yesterday, it's so good. I put get your copy now twice. And LinkedIn, please feel free to follow me. I post often about this topic and am continuing to work on some things that I'll be sharing in the coming weeks about how we can take this and make this more actionable as security leaders. Thanks so much, Elliot, for having me here.
Dustin, that was awesome. And I know you said earlier that people wouldn't want to sit here for hours listening to you talk about behavioral science and cybersecurity, but with this audience, I guarantee you that they would be transfixed. That was great, and I feel like we're just getting started here. I wish we had another hour, but I know that you are pressed for time.
Dutch Schwartz said that he would buy everybody who is attending right now a couple of rounds of alcohol or adult beverages to make up sure we have more time to talk about this.
All right, everybody. So, everyone, give Dutch a message on LinkedIn here. I'm sure that he'll appreciate that, and he'll hold his head into the bargain. Uh, do you have an extra 5 minutes here? Or do you have to get going right away here,
I
Dustin?
do have an extra 5 minutes.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay. So I guess we don't have too much time to get into the background. Dustin's referenced a couple times how we know each other through a mutual friend, Sean Bowen. That itself should probably be its own show at some point. But
Yeah.
Sean is someone who connected us, and Sean tragically passed away last year doing what he loved. And I met Dustin through that, and I've met several people through Sean as well. And we're all in a fantasy football league. So some of those references that some people might be kind of like, what's going on there? That's it. We're all in a fantasy football league full of CISOs and security leaders. It's a great time. So Dustin, the one thing I do want to say is that so that was an awesome presentation. I learned a lot, and I look forward to going over this and looking at this. And I think we have some questions, the comments. You can get a copy of that presentation. I think that's fine. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. So how about the users? So when we're talking about moving from system to system thinking, how can you get users to cut through the noise, especially when there's so much noise and there's so much really new noise that we didn't evolve to actually be able to find the signal within with AI and deepfake and whatnot. What are we talking about now with some kind of a training, some kind of a program, some kind of outreach? They can actually get people to do what you're talking about, to make those decisions, to change those behaviors.
So, because what probably the most important thing, the best thing is to delay intuition and to slow the process, putting in a nudge of some sort. I know we all hate the "are you sure this was you" kind of thing, or the captchas, or the, MFA prompts, or all of those things. Like, that process, though, slows your brain to a point where you go, wait a second, something about this just doesn't seem right. Because how many times have we had an end user who says, I clicked the link and then I immediately realized I had screwed up? Like, let's, if we can implement a strategy that says, or a roadblock of some sort, yes, it is going to be adding some level of friction, but what isn't the acceptable amount of friction I can implement to slow you down enough to get you to stop and think? So think about this. The example I'll give you is this, and I love using practical examples we can all relate to. When you're teaching a child not to run into the middle of the street, what do? They run off the sidewalk. You grab your arm and hold them back. You've put that there. They stop right away and they go, "Oh yeah, I wasn't supposed to run into the street." That arm putting out, yeah, it adds some friction. They can't run straight to go get the ball, but you've given them a chance to stop and think about what they're doing. The reason I use children a lot as an example is because the the child brain is that pure human built-in behavioral science brain. It hasn't yet had a chance to create many of the heuristics that we create. It actually takes a more mature brain to create heuristics. So I bring up children because those are a great example of what the pure brain that we are born with does. So that act of just putting your arm out. So, the act of saying, "Hey, like, why do what is this?" I'll ask you this, Elliot. What's the strategy that we tell people to use when they're writing an email, um, and they're in an emotional state? What do we typically tell people to do?
Don't do it till the next day.
Wait, stop, give it a few minutes, think about it, delay the send until tomorrow, set it
Absolutely.
up for delay send. We're implementing, whether we realize it or not, a behavioral science intervention. The idea is wait until tomorrow, because when you come back tomorrow, you're going to look at it now, not in that same emotional state, not with that same amount of noise, and you're going to make probably a more sound, maybe not, still not the best, but a more sound decision. You will have given your brain time to think about that decision a little bit more. That's why we often talk about stopping people from impulse buying by saying, don't buy it for 3 days or for a couple of days. Wait a couple of
Mm-hmm.
days, and if you still want it or still need it, then buy it, because now you've had time where, whether you realize it or not, your brain is thinking about it.
Those are two great examples too, because when you're being socially engineered, they're creating that urgency, that
Absolutely.
fear, that rage, or they're creating that sense of false reward. And that emotion is going to heighten and accelerate your response to something in a way that's, not going to be really great for you. And
So I'll share this one because we've talked about him multiple times, and I feel like it's only appropriate here to talk about him as many times as I can. But I remember distinctly, Sean was overseas. He was in, I believe it was Switzerland, doing a conference, and I think he may have even been with you, Elliot, at the conference that he was at. Um, and
wasn't
and
with me, but I know this. He actually brought another league member, Antonio Mecci, into our
Oh,
league from that
yes,
conference.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he and I both got text messages that appeared to come from the CEO of our company. Now, Sean would have regular text conversations with the CEO. This was the first time I had ever had any interaction with the CEO, and I'm going, this seems a little suspicious. Like this just doesn't seem right. And I go, Sean, I just got this message. Is this? He goes, well, I'm glad that you asked, because, if I could tell you right away that this was too grammatically correct to have been the CEO. He doesn't send these messages this grammatically correct, and he doesn't refer to himself this way. But so it's that act of just stopping and going, this doesn't smell right. This doesn't seem right. There are times where using your gut and your intuition are good. If your intuition is telling you to slow down, that is something to lean into. If your intuition is telling you to act urgently, then you need to be really careful. But whenever your intuition is saying, slow down, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't seem right, something's rotten in the state of Denmark, that's when you need to worry.
I laughed at that because it is sort of funny that obviously he knows the CEO and the grammar shouldn't have been so good, but that brings up a whole another can of worms, the fact that it's no longer bad grammar that tips you off
Right.
to a fish. It's is it too good in today when generative AI is creating these messages. So these
Yeah,
are
absolutely.
great points here. So I know you have to get going. I
Yep.
literally could sit here and talk to you for another hour, so I have to schedule another webinar at some
Oh,
point
for
to
sure.
do together.
Well, I encourage everybody to, I go into a lot more depth on these topics in the book. It was a really fun experience. It was a really great opportunity. I love going out and talking about this. Check me out on LinkedIn again. I talk about these topics all the time. I'm happy to come speak to any organization or any company about these topics, because again, I think there are really easy, really simple, really low cost things we can do that will enhance both the user experience and the security practitioner experience, because you never want to be in a situation where you're having to do every time you've got to introduce a new strategy, you're just burning money, basically burning time, burning money, burning people out, etc. So if you can start with by injecting behavioral science, you're I've seen situations with 20 to 30% better outcomes than than you would get if you just tried to do it and throw spaghetti against the wall. It's, if you're waiting for the spaghetti to stick, that's not going to be a very good thing. Find partners that can help you. Find partners that are talking about it the way that we've been talking about it today, which is why I was so excited that Hawks Hunt wanted to have me, because an organization that's out there trying to do it a different way and make you think differently. I'll leave with that. Apple had the whole think different campaign, back in the 90s, and there's something to be said about that.
Amen. Think differently and behave better, folks. Let's make October Awareness Month, October Behavior Month here.
And as we found out at the beginning, it is also, but not only, Pumpkin Spice Month. So
Correct. Pumpkin Spice Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It all comes together into one big
sponsored
mug of,
by Starbucks.
yeah.
No.
Maybe eventually. Maybe we're working our way towards that. Well, hey, Dustin, this was great. This was
Thank
great.
you.
Great talking to you. And yeah, everybody do please look at Dustin's work is fantastic. The book is worth reading. I highly recommend it. I'll be putting out a review of it soon, but don't wait for the review. Just go out and get it. It'll be worth your time. Start with behavioral science, and the results will follow, folks, in your programs.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.